Good afternoon, participant, and welcome to the webinar on analyzing SCP financing options for SME learning from Asia to Central Asia. Before we start, we would like to inform you on the housekeeping. Please be informed that your microphones are muted to prevent any interference. If you have any question, please feel free to submit them through the chat or the Q&A so that the host and the panelists will give you the permission to speak and address your question. And the recording, we will record the session for reporting purposes. So for any question, please feel free to let us know. Thank you.
Colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, and for some of our experts connected from the Pacific, good evening. Welcome to the webinar Analyzing SCP Financing for SMEs. This is the result of very comprehensive and large work, which would be distilled to you at this occasion within 1 hour. More information could be reached later on through our website. We are going to feed it into interested ears and minds gradually. My name is Zinaida Fadeva. I'm team leader of policy support component of Switch Asia program. This program is the longest technical advisory of the European Union to the Asia and the Pacific region. The geographical coverage now is 42 countries across Asia, Pacific, and the Middle East. The objective is to facilitate policies and practices in the area of low carbon, resource efficient, and circular economy, while facilitating activities or development of sustainable activities across the major supply chains within the region and also between Europe and the region. The program consists of 2 components. One is a grant projects, which intend to test and model SCP and circular economy practices in medium, small size companies and by the consumer organization. This is really hands-on on the ground in countries practices. And second component, what is called policy support component, which develops on the request of the governments and regional organizations, policies, roadmaps, frameworks, which help to uptake sustainable consumption and production and circular economy practices. And it is within this component, team of which is with you today, this work is being presented. It is my big pleasure to introduce my colleague, Cosima Star, who is a lead within the team of this work. Cosima, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Zinaida. What we want to do today is present to you the insights of a technical advisory that was conducted by our 2 experts, Sanjoy Sanyal and Vic Avainsa, on numerous countries in Asia and Central Asia. And what we will do today is spotlight 4 countries, Laos, Cambodia, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and the results of the country studies with regard to available financing for SCP activities from SMEs. What we want to do is go a little bit beyond just the country insights themselves, and also share with you not only how was this research conducted, but also what are maybe the meta insights that we have gathered across the countries. Part of this, of course, is the importance of the policy framework under which financing is being made available, both with regard to the financial sector itself, as well as, let's say, the broader framework for SMEs. And I think, or I hope, that with this research and the 4 exemplary countries, you can also gather some idea on maybe how to conduct this type of analysis for your own country if you're not from one of the countries where we did conduct this research. And also, most importantly, even for those countries where we did conduct the research, how can you keep this updated for your own purposes, whether you're a Switch Asia grantee, a policymaker, or community stakeholder, or a researcher or consultant working on these topics, because the entire landscape is incredibly quickly evolving. And as you will see, there is multiple perspectives that are helpful to be taken up and then to be sort of combined with each other to see where a specific country is headed in terms of SEP financing availability, as well as enabling policies. And yeah, so I will hand over to one of our experts, Sanjoy Sanyal, now, who has conducted the research for the key countries. But I'm also very pleased to let you know that our second experts who conducted these studies, Vic Abines, is also in the call. And yeah, I hope also for a lively discussion after we have shared these insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Cosima. Thank you, Vic. And first of all, I do want to express my gratitude to everybody who has joined the call. Me and Cosima and Vic, we worked through this last year. It was in a period of really intense looking at very interesting data that came in, and we hope we can share some of this with you because we really hope it'll help you. As you just to start off with a few definitions. The one type of SCP activity, sustainable consumption and production activity, that you are already familiar with is things that make incremental efficiency improvements. So cleaner production, pollution control, waste, reducing waste, energy efficiency as well. That's in what we call incremental adjustments. The word incremental is important. It means that that over a period of time, the multiple incremental adjustments make a significant difference. So it is really important, though it's probably not earth-shaking or something of that sort. The second one is what we call significant sustainability improvements. And this, for example, would be new ways of doing things, repairing your mobile phone so that it lives, if I can use that word, for a longer period of time. And I believe a lot of circularity economies come into this type 2. And then the third one is what we call, developing, reshaping our existing or developing new business models. And I, in the context of this presentation, will use the word innovation, innovative SMEs, to often refer to this type 3, because this often means developing new ways of doing business. For example, having platforms to sell agri-value chains or waste recycling and things like that. I don't have control on the slides. Just yeah. So the other definition that I do want to clear out before we move further is the word is climate finance and the SME finance, and how SCP finance in our project nests between these two. Now, climate finance, broadly under environmental finance, comes under climate change mitigation. It comes under climate change adaptation. It also, other environmental, as you see in this slide, is biodiversity, for example. SME finance is not always climate finance. So it sits outside. you're running a small hotel and you raise some money for it. That's SME finance. Or you're making some products, plastic products for a large company, you raise some money for it. That's SME finance, and that sits outside it. But in all these Asia Pacific countries that we are talking about, SMEs play a significant role in sustainable consumption and production. So one thing that we did look at was to look at SME finance broadly, and then looked at climate change, what within that is climate finance. And with that, let us explain the methodology of what we did. Next slide, please. Okay, I think, and this really is an important message that me and Cosima and Vic want to share. And Cosima, right at the beginning, said that how do you do this in your own countries? How do you keep it up, the information updated? And it's, we from our side would like to convey that is not rocket science. It is fairly straightforward methodology, and we want to explain this methodology in as simple terms as possible. So in any country, or most countries in the Asia Pacific that we come from, there are three types of players, or three types of actors, if I can use that word, in the financial system. One is public financing programs, and these often are either run by governments themselves or run by apex development financial institutions, which are essentially government organizations. And you'll see examples of that in the course of the four countries that we'll talk about later. The other is national commercial banks. They could be focused, some of them are focused on SMEs, some of them are not so focused on SMEs, but almost every one of them has an SME program. And the other is the private sector investors, the venture capitalists, and the funds that invest in what we talked about at the beginning, the three type of SCP innovation. The word I use is innovation. And in these countries, what the easiest and the best way we use this approach is to understand the flow of money to these three actors from the international development financial programs. Now, who are the international development financial programs that we all know? They're either the multilateral development banks or the bilateral development banks. The multilateral development banks such as IFC, Asian Development Banks, the bilateral development banks, they're the KfW and DEG and AFD, and the individual country bilateral banks. And of course, you have the specialized climate finance banks. The most famous of this is the GCF. So the methodology that we used, and the methodology that we want to share as, if I can call it open source in this webinar, is to identify the programs by which the international development financial institutions have funded these three actors. Once you establish that flow of money and understand what the projects that they are getting into, it is the best way to understand the SCP finance and the broader SME finance that we talked about in the previous slide. With those sort of introductory comments, we would now get into the individual country presentations. Shall I? Yeah. If there are any questions at this stage, it'd be nice to if you can pop them in the chatter or the chat, or we try and address them in the part of the discussion. So with this, having said that, what is a broad snapshot view of the policy framework in Laos? It does not yet have a sustainable finance policy to support green, as in it does not have a specific green finance program, but it does have, as we said, it is important to look at this in the broader context of SME finance. It does have 2 SME finance programs, and it is in the process of obviously developing a more sustainable finance roadmaps. The Bank of Lao has signed an agreement with the IFC, and the Lao Securities Commission is considering sustainability points. We have a hand raised. Is there a question that we can take at this stage, or should we take it later?
Sancho, I suggest that Cosima will signal you right away if the questions during the presentation are relevant for the flow of the presentation. Otherwise, colleagues, well, if you are raising your hand during the presentation and you want immediate answer, you'd better type, and then co-facilitators will pop it into the flow of the presentation, please.
Thank you. So that's the broad policy framework in Lao. If we now look at what are the options in the next slide in the for SMEs. And again, as I said, it's important to look at the broad context of SME finance. We do have the public finance program. Remember that actor that we talked about in the beginning. We have the Lao Access to Finance Firm. It has been supported by the KfW, a bilateral development bank, and it provides loans to all SMEs. We have the commercial bank, which is Aklida Bank Lao, which is focused on SME financing, and we have the BFL, which is a little bit larger program, supports the larger SMEs. What is interesting that in Lao, with its, as I said, no specific focus on green SMEs. We have 4 innovative SMEs, the type 3 that we talked about. We have the ADB's own frontier facility, which has a seed program, and has actually made 2 investments in the food sector. One is in coffee, actually, and which is I believe worth remarking upon. What does this mean? I mean, if there's one takeaway I would say is that if you're building an SCP SME, you really have to think about market linkages and building your market. Then you'd get access to some of these funds, which not necessarily only focused on SCP, not even only focused on green. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, what is if outside the SME area, whereas international financing gone? Obviously, anybody who's got any sort of acknowledgement of Lao, knowledge of Lao, would know that we have large-scale forestry projects, green climate fund projects, GEF projects in Lao, and also projects on forestry and biodiversity. One of them has an SME component that is supporting small businesses that use forest products. The other one, of course, is in the area of climate smart agriculture, again on agribusiness, and has an SME component. Also has a microorganization component that is MSME, smaller than SMEs. We have water projects. We have ecosystem-based flood management projects. All of these are important because, and as we will discuss in the next slides, it's important to just remember, if one doesn't have to go to the details, forestry, agriculture, resilience, water, these are all important topics in which money has flown into Lao. Next slide. Yeah. So why is this important? So if you are, for example, and I hope there are people from Lao on this call, if you are, and SME in Lao, and one of the things that you could look at, hopefully, is that since that you could look at since money is there in forestry, agriculture, ecosystem services, how can the private sector help scale up that project using business models that are viable and that can get money from the Lao Access to Finance Firm and so on and so forth? that's one of the things that will be important. And of course, the other thing is just keep in mind, how the taxonomy is emerging, how the large banks are which green areas they're focusing on, and you can focus your business on that. So that's, this is an example of how the methodology is used, of where the money is flown, where the money is, to understand what options the SMEs can have. Next slide, please. And if you are a policymaker, or you are working in the finance industry, remember that the forestry projects have lessons outside the country. The ecosystem-based flood management project, very interesting for many countries in this part of the world. It is important, as you support your grantees and you support other enterprises, that you figure out how your SMEs can work on these projects and help scale them up. Let's move from Laos to the next country, and Cambodia, obviously. And obviously, Cambodia the economic situation in Cambodia is a little bit different, but we still have a leader there, which is with a very strong focus on SMEs. But the one interesting thing about Cambodia is that it has the SME bank, and to many people who have worked in the Asian world know that this is a very powerful way of supporting SMEs. They have a specialized SME bank. They have, unlike, let's say, Laos, they have at least two organizations, the Foreign Trade Bank and the Maxima for Microfinance, which is focused on green SMEs. These are the commercial banks and the microfinance organizations. They have, on the venture capital side, ADB's Frontier Facility is active in Cambodia, made one investment in Cambodia. They've actually made two in Laos, as we talked about. But unlike Laos, there is, at 5 venture capital funds, companies active in this area. Again, broadly as small and medium enterprises, but there is already, you can see things that they have done in sustainable consumption and production. Let's move to the next slide, please. What's the main policy framework? Again, just to distinguish a little bit from Laos, in Laos we said that there is no real focus on sustainable and green, more broad focus on SME. In Cambodia, the Association of Banks has actually issued the sustainable finance principles as voluntary principles. It's not mandatory at this point of time, but once the Association of Banks takes a step, it is an important step. The SME bank is a policy bank for SMEs. That means that it has the ability to influence other banks in how they work. And the third one is that there is obviously a very strong signal to support innovative SMEs, the type 3 that we talked about, through the Techno Startup Center, and focused around agricultural markets in particular, not only agriculture, but again, some agricultural focus, which has a SCP angle to this. So you get a sense that, a country which is moving forward on this agenda. Let's look at the next slide, please. Okay, now look at the number of actors here. Again, broadly SME, 7 banks have received funding from the IDFIs. I'll remind you of the way we did the methodology. We mapped the main IDFIs in the world. For each of those international development financial institutions, whether they're multilateral development banks or bilateral development banks or specialized climate funds, like Green Climate Fund, we looked at which are their partner organizations in each country. And you could do the same in any country. So 7 banks, 6 MFIs, 10 VC funds, 3 companies, direct companies. That's a reasonable amount. It's not all green. Let's just be clear about this. But they do provide some opportunities that if you are a green business, and we said this earlier, if you're a green business and you're growing, you could go to these banks and say, I have a profitable business. By the way, it also helps improve the economy because it leads to sustainable consumption production, but I make money and I can pay back your money. So, I should get a loan. Let's move to the next slide. Which is essentially, what the slide says, that since there are financing organizations, it is important for SMEs to focus on profitability and growth. We cannot underestimate the importance of this recommendation. It is important to think about sustainability, right? Sustainability as in financial sustainability, as also environmental sustainability, right from day one. The other thing is that because Cambodia has been, large companies have been growing in Cambodia, SMEs should figure out market linkages with some of these large companies to be part of their supply chain. So we are already halfway through our discussion, and we move to the next country. Well, actually, before we do that, I mean, you just need to sum up what we expect in Cambodia. Vic, myself, Kosima, we've worked in the SME sector for a long, long time. We remain very optimistic that the SME bank, which is now young, can have a very significant impact. We believe that as if you are working in the country, you should start understand their strategies. We also feel very encouraged by the system for supporting innovation, and we believe that that would evolve. We are also believe that the banks will take up the Association of Banks guidelines. Already one bank has started making disclosures, so that would only accelerate. Let's move to so from Southeast Asia now we hop across and we are coming to South Asia. Here's what we found in South Asia. So we found that the options are kind of limited, but we do have the Punjab Small Industries Development Bank Corporation, which is developing a World Bank project. We do have the Bank of Al Falah, which has got a green market project. We do have the HBL Bank, agricultural value chain financing. But what is interesting, according to us, is that even with this, the commercial banks, sort of muted, we do have support for the type 3, what we call the innovative enterprises. We have several innovative startups. We have a local venture capital fund, which remember we didn't have in Cambodia, called TOSI Ventures, which is focused on, which has already made a food-related investment, which is linked to SCP. So this is definitely something that is worth remarking upon. Let's go to the next slide, please. Policy frameworks, unlike Lao, definitely, and perhaps unlike Cambodia as well, the State Bank of Pakistan has introduced the green banking guidelines, and the Securities Exchange Commission has issued green bond guidelines, which allows companies to, at least the larger companies, to start issuing, what is called, raise new types of money from the market. And the green banking guidelines, helps banks develop at least some targets around what to lend to green and how much to lend to green. Let's move to the next slide, please. The areas of international financing, want to draw your attention to circular economy, very, very focused on, very, very related to SCP. We have a project, very interesting project. Do look it up. With the GEF funded projects to turn bio-waste to textiles. We have a circular economy incubator, which feeds into the type 3 innovation, those innovative startups we talked about. We have projects in climate smart agriculture. And of course, we have the 10 billion tree projects preventing land degradation that both GEF and KfW funded. Exactly similar to the project in Cambodia, we have in this case, a GCF funded project for ecosystem-based flood management. You will see very similar concepts there, essentially, of how natural capital, which is ecosystem-based approaches, can help in managing climate disasters. Let's move to the next slide, please. So, if you are from Pakistan, what do you do? You'd probably, again, a bit like Cambodia, Lao there, leverage the investments in the climate sector, figure out ways of how you can use those climate projects to scale up your business. But you'd also, understand that there is venture capital interest, and therefore you would probably explore type 3 innovations. You'd explore new business models in areas such as food and circular economy, which are areas of interest in Pakistan. The next one, please. So what should you learn? We again, from our standpoint, we would say emergence of innovative SMEs, type 3 innovation. And we do believe that the climate projects on the ecosystem-based adaptation and the land degradation have lessons far outside the country, worth studying in our opinion. And then the last country that we'll talk about today before we open up for discussions is Bangladesh. Bangladesh, in a small country, but interesting from the discussion that we're going to have today, is that it provides concessional refinancing for green projects. It's kind of unique in that respect. The Bangladesh bank is far more active. It unlike the other countries that we talked about, the Bangladesh bank, which is a central bank of Bangladesh, the state bank of Bangladesh, if you can call it that way, has a contracts direct lines of credit with which they then disperse through other commercial banks. So they will connect directly with an AFD or a KFW or whatever have you to get a line of credit, which then they will manage through multiple commercial banks. One of them is in the SCP area of textiles. Direct lines between commercial banks and international development financial institutions, 7 of them. Bangladesh is also, as many of you know, the country which produced some of the world's most interesting MFIs and NGO MFIs. The 5 of them. But unlike even Pakistan that we talked about earlier, it's got only one VC fund which is focused only on Bangladesh. So is that if you're a type 3 entrepreneur, then that's not necessarily great news. Let's move to the next slide, please. So from a policy framework, it already has a sustainable financing policy, very specific targets for green and sustainable lending, not very different from the other countries that you will already notice. Very detailed guidelines on climate disclosure and reporting. Really no country has done this so far. It has got 2 apex development financial institutions, more focused on large companies, but it has had ability to support smaller companies as well. And very uniquely, 2 climate disaster funds, absolutely unique, not just in South Asia, but perhaps in the world. One is the BRAC Climate Migration Fund. Do look it up. And then, of course, that Bangladesh is one of the early recipients of the Global Shield against climate risks, which was set up in COP27. What does that lead to? Let's look at the next slide, please. Bangladesh, I would say international finance flow to several organizations in Bangladesh. As I said, Bangladesh Bank directly contracts lines of credit. It's done 5 of them in the last few years. 11 banks, 2 non-banking finance companies. That's not a small number by any stretch of imagination. Given the number of MFIs in Bangladesh, 4 MFIs, however, probably looks a little bit small, but some of these organizations like BRAC, for example, is absolutely well known in the world. What is surprising is that money has flown to 10 companies, in medium-sized companies in food and textiles, which are SCP related areas. Not really always green, but you could if you're running an SCP sustainable consumption and production SME, you probably can think about supplying to some of these companies. And then let's end with the last slide, which is that if you are in Bangladesh, then you probably, as we said earlier, type 3 innovative, you have to think hard. But if you're not a type 3, you're a general SME, again, going back to the same message that we said earlier, that you need to focus on profitability and revenues. And then you could focus on supplying to the large companies. Those are the real options that you can explore. That would be an important thing. So, I would end this at this point of time and open this up for questions and discussion. But 3 key messages. Number 1 message: it is absolutely, you cannot pour in money on a business that doesn't. Let me just finish off what we expect from Bangladesh before I try and sum up this. There's no doubt in our opinion that the green policies of the central bank would help banks in making climate disclosures and finding climate opportunities. Then the strong MFI network, which also has ability to a strong ability, I should say, to focus around climate projects, and the climate disaster focused funds. That one we strongly recommend that you study, and possible to replicate all over the Asia Pacific country. So 4 messages. Number 1 is that it is absolutely important as an SME, as an SCP SME, to start thinking about where money can come from in the broad SME context, and how can I build a business model that can be attract debt capital or other types of capital. And we could do that. If you are an SCP SME, you could do that by selling to larger companies, selling to export markets. But of course, if you're supporting SMEs, it is important, for example, in areas which are more difficult, construction, plastic recycling, to think about policy frameworks that help create the market. So that's message number 1. Message number 2 is that, whatever we did, we spent a lot of time, and, Vic, Cosima, it was wonderful. All 3 of us had a great time, but you could do all this yourself. You could update all the research yourself. Look at the methodologies, look at what the international development financial institutions have done, and then, see how the money has flowed, whichever way you want to say that, to the financial systems actors in each country. And the third is look at SCP finance in the broader context of SME and green finance and climate finance. With that, at least I'll stop now, and then we do have our colleagues Cosima and Vic as well. We can take questions, but unless Cosima and you want to add a few words as well.
No, I think maybe if we go to the next 2 slides, also with regard to insights and discussion, and then, yeah, move into the discussion. Exactly.
Well, I'm sure everybody has questions, but we do have 3 burning questions from our side. One is, if does this type of mapping help? It'd be nice to know if it does help, of course, but does it help to, for example, eliminate, as you're starting projects, to eliminate what one should do, and prioritize that? Okay, here is the things that we should focus on, and not focus on things, and not spend time focusing on things that may not yield results immediately, at least in the frame of your grant project. And the other is, as you implement, if you're a grantee, our second question is, would it help to have a sounding board to monitor progress and learn from others? We've already pointed out that there are things that from Cambodia one can learn from in other countries, for example. Does it help doing that? And then how would, if you are an organization which is thinking of a project, how would you learn? Would it help you to learn in detail about the climate projects in your countries? For example, the ecosystem-based approach of flood management that we discussed, and then and perhaps discuss how an SCP SME strategy fits into it. So these are the three questions that we had. First, would mapping help? This type of mapping, does it help? Does support tuning and implementation help? And then as you think about your project, to understand, the climate projects in particular, understanding that in detail help. This last slide, we could do it at the end, but it's basically, it says what we said earlier, the importance about markets. When you're supporting an SME, focus on the customer of the SME. Make sure that the SME is going to make money. An example is from our own grant projects, the low carbon rice project in Indonesia. If you haven't looked at it, do look at it. The tuna project in Philippines, which focused on the food processors, not necessarily the fishermen, but the food processors. I think that shifting of the lens is so important. If you're thinking about supporting SMEs, develop partnerships with larger innovative SMEs. Again, the Philippines questions, because they often have money and technology. The Philippines project, the tuna project, developed a partnership with the traceability companies. Two of them actually. One of them actually was based in Philippines. The other one was not. Again, very interesting example. And of course, start early. Start early in the process. Think about the money part first. Explore funding streams. And one example that we draw your attention to is a company called Non, which sells mattresses on a rent basis, if that is the way you can say it, but raises crowdfunding capital, completely new way of raising money.
Sanjay, we also have some questions in the chat. So one would be with regard to Lao PDR, where it's asked if there is a national policy framework in support of SME finance.
Yeah, well, I can't. Should I take that answer quick?
Sure. I'll also give you some more questions. So also with regard to Bangladesh, what our perspective on the Grameen Bank is, and then lastly, no, there are some more coming in now. That's great. Maybe a word about political instability. Our discussant asked particularly about Pakistan and Bangladesh, also with regard to the debt that Pakistan has and its dependence on the IMF. And yeah, maybe let's start out with these questions.
Yeah, and Cosima, and Vic, you should feel free to jump in as well. On the Lao question, that is fairly straightforward. The problem in Lao, as the person who asked the question probably already knows, is that the definition of SMEs is not very clear. The most company and enterprises are informal. They're micro enterprises. So that's the issue. Having said that, the Lao Access to Finance Fund, which started off being run under the Bank of Lao, but is now an independent entity, does provide refinancing to other banks, which then finances SMEs, and including most of the micro SMEs. So that's the one that we would probably talk about. In the context of Bangladesh, Grameen is among the many MFI type banks. So we have BRAC Bank and Grameen Bank. Many of them have very significant operations in supporting communities and vulnerable individuals in climate finance areas. And the interesting thing in the case of Bangladesh is that the ones we talked about, BRAC, Bureau, Coast Foundation, Sajida Foundation, is the integrated approach that they have. So they have the right from vulnerability analysis to capacity building to the ability to provide the finance, which is the financial inclusion. And also BRAC, for example, has this ultra poor program that they know that microfinance cannot target the absolutely poor. So that's the focus around that. Those are very encouraging things in our opinion. The political stability, this is not going to be easy. The only comment that I'm going to make is that this is not going to be an easy decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe also with regard to Grameen Bank, because we did look into it. If we think back about the nested concept slide, of course, Grameen Bank is really very much targeting the social angle with regards to their financing micro entrepreneurs, women-led small enterprises, and oftentimes this is a one-person enterprise. And similarly, I think their environmental efforts are very much specific to like these type of smaller engagements, like for example reforestation, seedling programs, etc. So with regard to, let's say, a larger concept and understanding of SCP, yeah, it's more the programs that we have listed that would be focused on these, let's say, more systemic issues. And with regards to the political instability question, it's an excellent question. We tried to cover this also in the briefings by just giving a short overview of the economic status. This was also part of our research aim, so that we don't look at SCP finance in a vacuum, of course, because it's very much tied to part of so many other political decisions and circumstances, of course. I see there are new questions. Sanjay, do you also have access to the questions, or should I just read them out?
Yeah, I do have access to the
great.
question. So I would take Benjamin's question as well, because I think this is Benjamin and his question. So, for example, for Thailand, his question is for Thailand, what resources can we turn to? The mapping would immensely benefit. The resources that you should turn to, Benjamin, is to start with just think of that methodology slide. Start with international development financial institutions. There are 3 types of them. One are the multilateral development banks, the other are the bilateral development banks, and then the specialized green climate funds, Green Climate Fund, for example. And look at the projects that they have done in Thailand. That is where this mapping that's how you can do this mapping in Thailand. And then identify the topics that they were interested in, identify their partners, you could identify a little bit of the progress and the lessons. That's pretty much it. In the case of, and I will also take the question of Thuy Anne, which is the question of Vietnam. We've actually done this analysis for Vietnam, so we could talk a little bit about it, but the same analysis.
Sanjay, just to add to what you said in terms of the Thailand and Vietnam question, I think it's important for these 2 countries to turn to the linkages between private and public sector development, private development, because this would lead you to the various projects that are into SAP SMEs in your countries, in Thailand and in Vietnam. So you could link up with business associations, you could link up to academia, and you could link up to other entrepreneurial support system in the country to build up these resources if you need such help in SCP financing of SMEs.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about Mao's question, which is in Cambodia. And the reason we talk about, I think it's a very important question that you've asked, Mao, in Cambodia. And it's applicable to all over the all over the world, I should say. And I'll repeat the question for everybody. You mentioned in Cambodia, that SAP SME should focus on profitability and growth, not remain in NGOs. So can you clarify or provide details on that? What we really meant is that, and an example of this is that SAP SME, let me put this, I'm babbling a little bit. Let me say the general principle. The general principle of making that comment is that SAP SMEs should focus on fundamentals of business, revenue growth, net profit margin, profit margin before interest, depreciation, tax, and then managing working capital, managing receivables. That's a general principle, because that's what makes them access SME financing in general, and SMEs and SCP SMEs financing options should be looked at in the overall SME financing concepts. So that's the general principle. But for example, one example that we can provide is there are opportunities, for example, that things within large NGOs can be spun out, for example, as a social enterprise. And there are several examples of that, all across Asia and Africa. If there is a demand for a particular service, for example, for monitoring soil health for farmers, or for example, for helping organizations predict weather and so on and so forth. That type of thing can be spun off as a social enterprise, and that enables the NGO to to access other sorts of capital.
Maybe I will start out with the question from Atul with regard to Lao PDR, and continue with Umar's question, but then Sanjay, please also come in for Pakistan, of course. So with regard to Lao PDR, yes, great comment. Of course, as a socialist country, let's say the overall conditions are somewhat different. And I think Sanjay also of course explained that, with regard to SMEs, the landscape in Lao PDR is very particular, in that there is, micro enterprises are the ones that are just most represented there. However, banks and also financing programs, despite it being a socialist country, are actually pretty similar to other, economic setups. And Lao PDR does have also a large presence of international development finance institutions, and so there is this engagement despite its socialist setup, where we actually also felt confident that the analysis that we would bring forward would be relevant. I would say that its characteristic as a socialist country is more visible in terms of the SME sector than in terms of the financing sector. And there's also actually much engagement from the government side with regard to reshaping the financial sector and integrating environmental and social considerations. Sanjay, would you like to add to this? Because this was one of your countries.
No.
And then with regard to the question from Umar, how to integrate climate resilience and check for impact assessment. I assume this is both from a, let's say, financial institution standpoint as well as from an SME standpoint. Financial institutions, when there is conditional financing, and SMEs, how to prove that there is climate impact. So what we have seen in other countries is, of course, that taxonomies are a great starting point, because what all financial institutions are looking for is, let's say, one-step simple solutions in integrating non-financial aspects into their assessments, right? Because any type of complication leads to a longer lead time, leads to more complex assessment steps. And so by installing at the government level things like a taxonomy, you actually enable this sort of streamlined approach to integrating non-financial considerations for financial institutions. And it's of course, it has itself also its own difficulties, but we've seen that it's a great first step. Sanjay, would you like to add on this?
Taxonomies are the one solution. I just want to emphasize this a little bit clearly. One solution. Not
Cosima.
Vic, you carry on.
Yes, please.
I think one important step there is to check on the impact assessment or impact of those projects would be to start to have a robust baseline data, because once you have a robust baseline data at the end of the project or the end, you can check how effective is your intervention versus your baseline data. I think that's one effective tool that we should remember when we start all our projects.
Sanjay, is there?
Yes, baseline data again is absolutely, very, very key. I will make one quick comment on and the one question. I see a couple of questions, and this is a typical. It's often a question that comes up. There is, in general, no international SME financing directly to SMEs from the IDFIs themselves. It is very rare. The one example of an organization, an IDFI which does that, is FMO, which is the Netherlands-based IDFI. But in general, across any country, the IDFIs don't necessarily invest in SMEs. They invest in private companies, of course, but larger companies. And then they invest in banks and in funds, who then fund SMEs. I think this is an important point, because there's a couple of questions on that line already.
I see that we also have a hand raised by Virgilio. Would you like to come into the discussion, Virgilio? Otherwise, of course, you can also type your question or comment in the chat. I think if you enable the microphone, you would be able to speak actually.
Could you please enable mic of Virgilio?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
While Virgilio taming the technology, maybe Viviana, you would like either articulate your earlier question or just type it. Would you like to also unmute Viviana Lopez, Mike?
Maybe these are also rogue hands. It happens. I think we have addressed actually all of the questions for now. Maybe we can, Zinaida, would you want to maybe just quickly summarize from your standpoint, and then Sanjoy and I would finish up?
Well, summary would be really a futile attempt. It's such a concentrated number of points, but what really has been highlights for me and colleagues, these documents, the briefs for individual countries in some format, extended or concentrated across different countries, will be published on our website. Also, the record of this video of this webinar also is going to be accessible. So if you want to go through some of the technical aspects, in case you are not pro in financing, you have a perfect opportunity to do it very quickly. Now, for colleagues which would come up with answers, please don't hesitate to send it to us on the already known address to you, and we will try to compile them and send it to the experts so that you will get more nuanced answer if needed. Now, what was interesting for me is certainly the whole gradient of the architecture of the support, which would be enabled from outside through concessional finance, then degree of development of the innovative venture capitalists, banks maturity, etc., etc. So overall, for me, as not a pro in finance, it has been very interesting way of looking at the financing for SMEs in the area of circular economy, SME work in SCP and in climate area. So the methodology itself provides good order or degree of order for understanding for not specialist in this area. Thank you very much for that. So that's one. The second very interesting point has been that it appears, and colleagues might confirm or disprove it, that textile and food become really some of the most mature area of support to SMEs through different chain of banking institutions or supply chain of banking institutions, which is certainly very interesting. And of course, as Sanjoy, you have mentioned, a big question for us would be to what extent such maturity of attention or spotlight on other difficult sectors like construction, which you mentioned, would be plausible. So that is certainly an interesting thing for us. Overall, there are 2 points which we draw for ourselves from a side of Switch Asia as a result of this work. Is number one is exactly this point that focus on profitability and revenue is very interesting and very important to remember. The fact that some of the SMEs or MSMEs are doing great job and waiting for financing on the basis of it is of course commendable, but it might not happen. So for it to happen, we really from our side would need to focus on actions towards market transformation, simply because if SME or larger company are able to sell the product, if market is requiring this product, then financing could probably be eased from whichever sources, commercial or non-commercial. So the question is not to adhere to the logic, I'm doing great things and waiting that I would be rewarded for that, doesn't necessarily work on its own. It means that this effort should be really very strongly complemented by our collective effort to facilitate market transformation. So, which means that from our at least side, again, of the Switch Asia as policy support component, we are and we will be making massive effort to create demand for this kind of resource efficient, climate resilient products and services by working with green public procurement and with policy portfolio which needs to accompany financial sectors actions and transformation towards more sustainable consumption and production. And the final maybe small point, but very, very important, is that we clearly saw through this work, and again, it comes through this exchange today, is that it's not only policy, it's not only capacity of the companies and along supply chain, different sectors which need to be built towards being able to transform the markets, but also it is capacity of the banks, which are learning in themselves and innovating in themselves to develop new financial products, which would and new systems, as Sandro, you called it, third type of innovation through the business model. So it's not only the producers are innovating, but also banks by creating different milieu around themselves and different relations themselves, different products to offer. So innovation is going on across the whole spectrum, and therefore the topic of innovation, which is going to be also highlighted very strongly in the briefs around the work which you have been doing, become very important. With this, again, colleagues, thank you very much on behalf of Switch Asia, and I'm turning over to our experts, which did a fantastic job for the final words.
Maybe I start. I just want to briefly mention that, yes, we just posted a previous report that is still very relevant with regard also to the definition of SCP financing in the chat, and we will be publishing the briefer versions of the country profiles within the next month. And of course, you know, we will acknowledge this on our social media channels, and they will be accessible on our website. And yeah, I hand over to Sanjoy and Vic for last words.
Well, I think 2 last words. Thank you.
And for Vic. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for listening. And
yes,
you have gained some new lessons, new insights from the way we should be conducting SME financing for projects.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Sinaida, also for tying all the different strings together and connecting the dots for us. And yeah, we hope to keep in touch with all of you with regard to this really important systemic lever of transformation, the financing sector.
Maybe the last big word of thanks is to our audience. The questions were really excellent, and it indeed shows us the points which we would need from our side to keep highlighting in advancing this field. Thank you very much for staying with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.